Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome back to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down again with our good friend, Mr. Jason Parker. Jason was a guest last week and we had such a great time, we thought we would have him back on again. So Jason is the president of Parker Financial and also author of Sound Retirement Planning and the host of the Sound Retirement Radio podcast. So welcome back, Jason. Excited to have you and appreciate your time today.
Mike, I am so excited to be here. There's a lot of people, a lot of business owners that are really perplexed about this whole transition into retirement of how do they do it. So I'm excited to be here today and take away some of that mystery, make things a little bit clearer for people.
That's great. Well, we hope you can help unwind this perplexed nature that they're all tied up in. So, yeah. All right. So, Jason, tell us right off the bat here, why is it that retirement is different now for business owners compared to what an employee would be dealing with, and why is it so important?
Well, it's a harder transition, I think, for business owners because of the amount of heart and energy and soul and time that they put into their business. And so a lot of times when there's a sale of a business or a transition of a business, there's some sort of liquidity event. And all of a sudden people have more money in a bank account and an investment account than they've ever had. They haven't really thought through all of the tax implications of how that money's going to flow to them. And most people don't really have any idea how they're going to invest that much money all in a lump sum. And so today, what I'm hoping we can talk about are some of the strategies, some of the things that people should be thinking about. Because, you know, a lot of people that are employees of a company, they might have a pension from the union or from their employer. They're most likely going to have Social Security, and most of the business owners are going to have Social Security as well. But most of the employees aren't going to have that big payout, that big payday like a business owner is going to have. And so making sure that you're thinking through. The other thing is sometimes business owners, they're not selling the business necessarily as well, they are selling it, but they're from a succession standpoint, sometimes they'll have family members or other people that are taking over the reins of that business. And so everybody's got to come up with some kind of agreement for how that liquidation is how that's going to occur.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think one other thing, and I was a construction company owner previous to helping start About Time Technologies for the last 20 years. And I was used to, certain expenses, certain things were, part of the company expense and, were justifiably tax-free or tax shells. And so what changes? Yeah.
All of a sudden, all those expenses are flowing right to your personal balance sheet, your personal budget. So, there's some things on when it comes to personal finance that are always going to be constant. If you're getting ready to retire, it always comes down to that spending number. A lot of times business owners really don't have any idea how much money they really spend because they expense a lot of it through the business. Cleaning up your books and, a couple of years before you're going to sell the business, just to make sure that you're getting top dollar for that is a good idea, to make sure that everything's as clean as it can be. But, like we talked about, retirement's pretty simple. It's just how long are you going to live? How much money do you spend? And how much have you saved? And then these business owners, they've got to figure out, okay, I'm going to have $1 million now to work with because I'm selling the business. Or I'm going to have $10 million or $20 million. There's something that happens there. As you go up, as the value goes up, you've got more tax complexity, you've got more estate planning issues, you've got more relatives coming out of the woodwork looking to borrow money. You've got a lot of these investment opportunities that are only available to accredited investors. So now you've got everybody and their brother coming out trying to sell you this, that, and the other thing. One of the things I see business owners get into all the time, again, because they're drivers, they're delegators, they create a lot of chaos, is they don't know how to put the brakes on that. They don't know how for that to all come to an end. And so unfortunately, sometimes what we see is marriages start to get pulled apart at when there's a big liquidation event like that. Because the guys are like, geez, what do we do? They're out to conquer the next thing, to try to create the next milestone. And sometimes that means that their relationships suffer. Sometimes I see people get involved in business ventures they don't know anything about, but all of a sudden they're going to become a restaurant, own a string of restaurants around town. And they don't know anything about that business, but they figure, well, since I was successful in the last business, I'll be successful in the next one. A lot of times people come into a lot of money and they just go spend a ridiculous amount on Corvettes and Ferraris and new house, and they pay off the kids' mortgages, and they do all kinds of stuff. They don't even know if that's sustainable, but they just, again, they're not used to having that much money, so they spend a lot of it. And then, the old saying, Mike, it's not how much money you make, it's how much you get to keep after it's all said and done. And a lot of people don't have real good tax advice, and they don't have good estate planning advice. So sometimes all they're doing is setting their family up for a big tax hit down the road. And sometimes the state that you live in can be a big, play a big factor in all this, because different, like where I live out here in Washington State, we've got this new 7% capital gains tax. Our state never had any kind of income tax. And now all of a sudden there's a big tax on the sale of long-term capital gains for residents of our state. My state also has something called an inheritance tax. So, if you have less than $12 million, you probably don't have to worry about federal income taxes. If you have more than $12 million, all of a sudden now you've got federal and state tax that you're worried about. But in Washington State, the exempt amount is only like 2.1 million. So if you have more than 2.1 million in Washington State, now you've got a state income tax when you die that you maybe didn't even think about prior. So, and you're exposed to more lawsuits. All of a sudden, if people know you've got a lot of money, you better make sure you've got those car insurance policies and homeowners insurance policies and all your insurance up to date. So, and then you've always got the risk of, whoever you sell the business to, they don't follow through on their end and actually make good on the payments. So a lot of times people will structure the sale of a business as an installment sale to help spread the tax liability out. And some people will even, to create a little bit more certainty, a lot more certainty, they'll do something called a structured installment sale, where they'll get an insurance company involved. So from the buyer's perspective, it's like a cash sale, but you get to have those installment payments spread out, which helps reduce your tax liability over time. And then, of course, as your income goes up over $500,000, then you've got all these extra special taxes you get to pay, like the net investment income tax. And you, instead of paying 15% long-term capital gains, you're paying 20% long-term capital gains. So there's just a lot of moving parts. But again, when it really boils down to it, usually when people are going to stop working, they just need to have a plan for what that next phase of life is going to look like. And not only the financial side, because for a lot of them, that becomes much easier when they have this big liquidation event, but what are you going to do with your time? And on my podcast, 2 years, it was actually 2021, I did a podcast episode called The One in 2021. I put together an ebook for people to really help them create some purpose around the next phase of their life. It's called Designing a Great Year. And in this ebook that I created, I've got 7 different exercises for people to go through to really think about what this next phase of life is going to look like, and make sure that you've got a lot of clarity around it. There's a lot of people that die, Mike, right when they retire, because they lose their purpose. They're not quite sure, what life consists of. Or if they don't die, a lot of times we'll see people get really sick right at retirement because all that stress is released. And so lot of things to think about. What about you? What's been your experience when working or talking to these business owners? What are some of the challenges they have?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that you mentioned are definitely very common issues. It's, people think, oh, I'm going to retire, and maybe they're, like us, pre-50 or even 40 years old, they have some big liquidity event, and all of a sudden they don't even know what to do with their time, right? So then, like you said, they'll use things that they think, like the Ferrari and the Lamborghini and other things to try and fill that void of purpose that they had. They're sort of a forced midlife crisis, if you will, when something like that happens. So I think your advice of, having that plan, I got to check this podcast out of Designing a Great Year that you're talking about, or your ebook, because that sounds super fascinating. And I think even for, even for companies that aren't looking to sell their business, I think the planning aspect and having purpose and goals and direction are always important when running a business, right?
Yeah, there's a great book I would encourage your business owners to consider if they're getting ready to retire. It's a book by a guy named Bob Buford, and the name of the book is called Halftime. And the subtitle, I think, is From Survival to Significance. And so how do you start thinking about, now not just legacy in terms of the money that you're going to leave, but legacy in terms of who you were, what you contributed, who have you mentored, and some of those other questions. So Bob Buford's book, Halftime, it's a classic. It's been around 20 plus years, but a really, really good book to get people thinking about this next phase of life. And Bob Buford's story is, he was a guy I think he was in his 40s, and he had a television network or a television conglomerate stations out of Texas, I believe, that he sold, had a big liquidation event, but then was kind of in that abyss. What's next? What does life look like? What's important now? And it's really fascinating. One of the things I love about the work that I do is I get to walk life with a lot of people that are actually in this phase of life, whether or not they worked on the employee side or the employer side. But all of a sudden, all of your priorities just shift and change. And the things that were important to you when you were 20 and 30 and 40 and you're hustling and trying to make the next deal happen, that's not there anymore. And so, the hard part is for business owners is that we work so hard to create that intensity that it's really hard to figure out how to turn that off at the next phase of life. That's why you really want to be intentional. So 7 exercises, and it's these 7 exercises I designed in the ebook. The ebook's free if you just look for, and I can send you a link to it. And I've got another document I'm going to send you to. It's a checklist for people. What issues should I consider when planning for the sale, disposition, or succession of my business? So I'll send you a link to that one too for your show notes. But you go through these 7 exercises, and I always encourage when you do something like this, it's better to do it with a group of people, 2, 3, 4 good friends, because then there's some accountability and you can have some people ask you questions. Better to not do it with a spouse, as much as it's important to have spouses involved in the conversation. Some of this other stuff, you really want it. I found that guys need to speak into one another's lives, and they can do that really honestly. And that's just a good way to think about designing the next phase of life.
No, it's exciting. I can't wait to see that. So let me push back on one thing. And not really a hard pushback, but I read an interesting book recently, and it is called Die with Zero. Have you heard of that book?
I have, yeah. Well, I don't know if I've heard that book specifically, but I've definitely heard that concept.
Yeah, so the book's amazing, actually. I just barely just read it last week. So in between the last time we talked, ironically, but one of my business partners recommended it to me. And you hear the title of the book, I don't think, okay, that's the answer to anything, but the concept and the approach of the whole book is more about scaling your life to make sure that you have meaningful relationships, fulfillment. You actually maximize your life. You maximize that number of breaths that you have left. And, for some people, maybe leaving a pile of money to your kids is a good thing. For others, it might be a horrible thing. It may not be the best thing for them. So like you mentioned, people paying off their kids' mortgages and doing all the other things, we all know and have heard the stories about people that win the lottery and how most of them end up within even 5 years or less, no matter how much money they won. And so I think there's a lot of great concepts and principles in that side of it too, where it's like, okay, you work your whole life, maybe a lot of people 65, 70 years. Some people are still working into their 70s and 80s. And they're so miserly with that money, and that they're just used to saving because that's how they grew up. And, maybe there's some legacy challenges from the Great Depression or from their parents and what they've learned, their grandparents, and all of these different old ways of thinking based on those times that maybe don't apply quite the same as they might today. So I think it's just good to have a well-rounded approach in planning and being purposeful in what you're doing so that everything is done with intention versus knee-jerk on any one thing or another. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I heard I think it was Warren Buffett that said, I want to leave my kids with enough money that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. And, I don't know about you, Mike, but when I was a young man, I had just graduated from college, and my girlfriend at the time was moving to Alaska. And so I had the opportunity, her parents said that I could move up there, and she was finishing college up in Juneau, Alaska. So I thought, boy, that sounds like an adventure. So I was driving my mother-in-law's car from California to Seattle, put the car in the barge. But before I left my house, my dad came out into the driveway and he gave me a hug, and then he shook my hand. And as he shook my hand, he pressed a silver dollar into the palm of my hand. It was the year of my birth. And he said to me, Jay, this is for when times get tight. He said, I've never had to go to my family for money, but I wanted to give this to you so when times get tight. And I tell you what, Mike, there were times in my life where things got pretty tight. I remember walking into a grocery store in my 20s, and I had a pocket full of change, but I didn't have enough money to buy butter at the back of the store. And so I know how hard life can be when you're getting started. And like you were saying, a lot of these people, they've learned to save because life hasn't always been as plentiful and bountiful as it is right now. But I still have that silver dollar my dad gave me. It's in a little, right next to my bed. And I'm proud of the fact that I've never had to go to my family and ask for money. And I think about my kids and the success that my wife and I have experienced. And I really think that had I been given a lot, I would have been robbed of the experience to learn what it means to become successful. And so I would never want to rob my kids of that experience. I think there's something to be said about the grind, about the difficulties, about the challenges, and being persistent and learning to overcome and never quitting. I mean, those are things you don't get stronger by sitting on the couch. Sometimes you got to lift stuff that's heavy. And I think that's really what we want for our kids. We want the best for them, but sometimes the best for them doesn't mean giving it to them. It means letting them go out and work for it. I'll never forget one time I talked to some folks, and their dad could have left them a big inheritance, but instead decided to give all the money to charity because he didn't want to leave his kids with so much money that it, like you said, it ruined their life. And you would think that some of these bad choices people get into are something that only young people do. But there was this one woman I met, and by the time I met her, her husband had already died. But he never really drank his entire life. And then at retirement, he became an alcoholic because he lost purpose. And so he'd sit down in the basement of the house watching TV and drinking all day. And it ended up being a really wonderful story because she got involved in Al-Anon, and then 4 years later, her husband decided to get sober, and he ended up getting into Alcoholics Anonymous, and then they both mentored people through a really difficult. So what was a really difficult phase of their life ended up giving them a lot of purpose later in retirement. And so she said she wouldn't change that. But sometimes those things like alcoholism, you think, oh, well, that's something a 20-year-old gets and messed up with, not somebody that's 65 years old that's retired. So you always got to be alert. You always got to be watching out. That stuff can get you at any phase of life. We're always playing a little bit of defense,
Yeah, that's great advice, I think, for everybody, regardless of whether you're selling a business or looking to your legacy. I think just having that internal self-accountability on, back to what we were saying earlier, having a plan, being intentional, doing things with intention, and not knee-jerk reacting to different things that not only life throws at you, but business especially. They say life is long, right? And so we need to make sure that the memory that we leave, along with the legacy that we leave, is what we want people to remember about us, as opposed to just, what feels good for the moment, right?
Yeah, that is important. We get this time that we have is valuable. It's and we get to nobody. I've got a coach that I meet with once a month. And he said to me, Jason, people can never receive too much encouragement. Nobody's ever complained about being encouraged too much. And it's there's this fine line between encouraging people versus, it's that give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. And that's really what we want to become. We want to become teachers. We want to help people keep America moving forward. This is the greatest place in the world, but it's the greatest place to live in the world. And everybody's trying to get here because our forefathers fought hard to make it what it is, not because everybody got something for nothing. And that's this mindset that we've got to get out of this people deserve something for nothing mentality and say, look, you deserve what you work for, and go out and get as much of it as you can, and then be as generous as you possibly can and help as many other people as possible. But it's an exciting time that we live in with all of the technology and all of the abundance. But along with all of that comes all of this responsibility, and more so than any time in history, we have this responsibility to one another. And one of the things I love about COVID and everything that happened with the pandemic is that it really helped us to see how connected we are with one another. One person can breathe out, and another person can supposedly get this virus, and it's just like, oh yeah, we're all connected. We are all in this together. I know that seems kind of cliche now, but
there's consequences for everything, and I believe it was Einstein, for every action there's equal but opposite reaction. It's like there's an ebb and a flow to life and to business and to these things that we're doing, and there's a cause and effect.
We're all interconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even with business owners, as they look to try and figure out what that looks like to pass the torch or to sell their business or to go the next phase of things, I think there's some pitfalls that people can fall into. What are some of the ones that you see people fall into? Maybe their eyes get big because they hear this big number and they think that there's all this opportunity. What do you try and recommend that they avoid so that they don't end up being in trouble or having challenges?
Well, one of them is, if you're going to internally pass that business to another group of people, it's really hard to find people that are going to care about something as much as you do. And so you've really got to make sure that you pour in, mentor that whoever that successor is going to be in the business, if it's an internal succession. And you see this all the time. A lot of times businesses don't make it beyond second generation, and maybe because the kids come into this thing and they're focused on the money that they can make, not the value that they can provide. As you know, and we all know, business is all about providing value and making other people's lives better. You're providing either goods or services that move things forward. And when people get too focused on profitability, then you end up with a healthcare system like we have in our country. It's all about profitability instead of the care that can be provided. So that I would say that's a big one. Understanding the tax implications when you sell. Again, it's not how much money you make, but how much money you get to keep at the end of the day. So looking at how you can spread that out. Understanding the estate planning that goes along with it, making sure that you've got your attorney involved. Those are just some of the pitfalls. But the biggest one really that I see business owners get messed up with is not having this purpose and not understanding what's going to fill their time. I'm telling you that you can't play enough golf you will get bored after about a month of hitting the golf course every single day. All of a sudden you realize this is not very fulfilling, and then you've got all this other stuff pulling at you. And when money isn't the most important thing anymore because you've got all the money that you need, then you have to say, well, what's the bigger picture? What really drives, and how is this going to make a difference? And that's where I think business owners, especially, because we're talking about people that are driven, that are movers and shakers, that they're builders. Not in the sense that they're construction, but they're builders in the sense that they like to make things happen. And so it is interesting, but it is challenging. And sometimes I think if you have a good team of advisors around you, you've got a financial advisor that can act as a coach, you've got a CPA, and you've got an attorney, so that when you come up with these crazy ideas for investing in restaurants or paying off the kids' mortgages, you're really thinking through what are the implications of that, thinking through all the implications.
Yeah, I had one of the attorneys that we've used here in the past had made a comment and said, and I asked a similar question, said, what advice do you try and give to companies that you're helping go through something like that? And he said, make sure make sure you don't buy the ranch in Wyoming before the ink's dry on the check, before you actually got the money in your account, because a lot of people, again, in anticipation of something, might make different decisions. And, if the deal falls apart, now you're stuck with something, or you have a burden that you weren't prepared to take on, right?
Oh man, there's another really good book for your listeners called Profit First. Have you heard of that one?
I haven't heard of that one, but
Profit First. Yeah, it's just a different way to run business. But the guy, again, he shares his own testimony, his own story about the sale of a business and how he and his wife walked into the dealership to buy the new car and didn't even ask how much it was going to cost. It was just, they had all this money to spend. And within a few short years of a big liquidation event, found himself broke, having to borrow money from his kid's piggy bank because he became an angel investor. And he just went and did a bunch of stupid things, and he had to start all over again. And that's a great book to share some of those warning signs. It's called Profit First. And so he talks about, if you're going to run a business, here's a good way to do it. And it goes, the big picture, the principle of the book is pay yourself first. Make sure that you're the first person that gets paid when you're operating a business. But also just this idea of stewardship and budgeting and telling your money where to go.
Yeah, so I love that, telling your money where to go. I've heard that phrase too, and I absolutely love that. So tell me this, you mentioned a little bit ago when you're meeting with your coach that you meet with once a month. Why in the world does Jason have a coach? I mean, you sound like you're a smart guy. You sound like you kind of know what you're after, and you have your direction, and you seem to have your path. Why would you need a coach?
I have a coach because I need people that can speak into my life that aren't, well, I am paying him, but I've got employees, but the relationship with my employees is different. They have a mindset. They want to protect their position in the company. And so they tend to tell me what I want to hear. And I need people that can see me from the outside and that can speak truth into my life. And there's something to be said about wisdom. So before I had a coach, I had a mentor. My mentor died a couple of years ago. And so he was somebody that I could talk to. And the thing that's interesting about success in business is the higher you go, the lonelier it gets. There's fewer and fewer people that you can talk to that really understand the position that you're in, because most people are just in survival mode financially. And so for me, that perspective, that wisdom, there's a verse that says, plans fail for lack of advisors, or plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. My friend Steve, that's one of his favorite verses. So yeah, I'm willing to pay people that can speak into my life and help me make sure that I'm moving in the right direction. And then also this particular coach that I'm paying for at this phase of my life, I had the good fortune to start a foundation. And I'm the president of this foundation now, and we're raising money to help more kids that want to have a Christian education have that option here in Washington State. And I really believe strongly in it because there's our kids just are being taught some stuff that seems really wacky to me. And so to be able to help protect and support and develop the next generation of leaders. Well, this gentleman that I hired as my coach, he has some experience in the nonprofit fundraising, so he can also help guide me in that new area of my life, which I don't know a lot about, but I'm learning. So
that's amazing. That's awesome. Sounds like quite a worthwhile venture that you're in, and congratulations on doing that. And I appreciate your leadership in doing something, taking action is something you feel passionate about. That's clearly important. The education of our youth is something I think many of us in society take far too lightly.
It's education, but it's also getting to tell these kids who they are. You are so much more than just an ancestor from an ape, and to help them know that they were created for purpose, on purpose, and that they're a child of an almighty God. I mean, that is a wonderful way to live your life, rather than just saying you were a fish that learned to swim up onto the banks of the river, and it evolved from there. So,
well, and it does make such a difference to know where you come from, to know who your parents are, who your grandparents are, what they stood for. And at least for me personally, it definitely gives me a lot of direction and is very instructive on me honoring and working diligently to try and continue having a good name for my family, that, they handed it to me in a good state, and they did a lot of good things that built up something of value that was not just a reputation, but something that our family name maybe stood for. And I not only don't want to mess that up, I'd like to make it better and hand it to my children and grandchildren in a better place than I got it. So I think that's brilliant that you're involved in such an important work like that.
Well, I've been the benefactor. I had the good fortune that my kids were able to get that type of education. And so I just think it's more important than ever that kids have options. If that's not what you want for your kids, so that's fine. But for the people that do want that for their kids, it can be expensive to have that type of private education. And so if we can help more kids get that, then I would be happy with that as, something that I was able to help make happen.
Well, and as a financial advisor, but also a person of faith and somebody who clearly tries to see the bigger vision of life and purpose than just, building up the bank account, I'm sure you would agree that, the financial side is only I would even argue, much less than half of the equation of living a meaningful existence and living a life full of purpose. Money helps make that easier in some instances, for sure, and as a tool that could be used to, again, fund programs like this and help pave the way for opportunity to grow. But at the same time, money in the absence of those other things is just what it is. And I think we could see in society what happens to people that just have piles of money but don't have very much sense.
Yeah, and I've had the good fortune to meet a lot of really wealthy, successful people. And I have met a lot of people that have a lot of money but don't have any fulfillment. They have no joy. They have depression. And so people think, if I just have a little bit more money, then we're going to be okay. I'll never forget one time I met a couple, and only one of them was working, and they had to file for bankruptcy because they said they didn't have enough money. Well, then a couple of years later, they both had these really good, high-paying jobs, but they were on the verge of bankruptcy again. And it's like, well, wait a second. You said that the reason you're heading into bankruptcy is because you didn't have enough money when one of you wasn't working. Now you're both working and you're back in bankruptcy. See, it's never a matter of not making enough. It's always a matter of not having the discipline to tell your money what to do at the beginning of every month. And then you get to the end of every month and you're like, where did all my money go? And so that's why I said this is like personal finance 101. But, another thing I would say for our business owners out there, because they're not used to having a big lump sum to invest, most of them don't have that experience to take $5-10 million and just go invest it. That's not what they've spent their time doing. Really good idea to get somebody that can give you some advice in that area. And I would encourage your listeners to look for somebody who's a fiduciary that has a legal obligation to act in your best interest. That would be a number one component that I'd be looking for. And also, if you can find independent firms so that they're working for you, they're not working for some company that has sales quotas. You don't want somebody selling you something when you're making some of the most important decisions of your life. But the other thing to consider is that I've learned that time is the cure to the volatility of the stock market. The more time you have, the more risk you can afford to take. So as you're making this transition into retirement, you're probably going to want to have some of your money in a short-term position, money that you're going to need to offset your lifestyle expenses for the next 0 to 5 years, maybe at the most. A lot of the people that we serve will have like 3 years of worth of cash. And then you diversify your money, not just based on asset classes and sectors across the entire globe, but you diversify your money based on when you're going to need it. So money you need in the short term is more conservative. Money that you don't need for 10 years can be invested more aggressively because we know the time is the cure to the volatility of the stock market. The last thing you want to do, though, is you don't want to have a big liquidation event, invest it all very aggressively, and then see the market falling 50% shortly thereafter. That's like being stabbed and going to donate blood at the same time. You've got a bad situation and you're making it worse. So we want to avoid having to take big distributions out of accounts that are potentially falling in value.
Yeah, and that brings up another question, and I think this is something that I think most people are maybe a little less aware of or astute to, and that's the tax implications of money like that. So what are some of the common pitfalls that you see people fall into from a tax perspective when they come into a big liquidation event?
Well, it's good to sit down with a CPA that has experience with the sale of a business, because they're going to be able to take your actual tax return and model it and show you a couple of different scenarios. But again, one of the most common is just to see people spread that sale of the business over a number of years so that they can reduce the tax liability. Sometimes people will do it through a structured installment sale where they get an insurance company involved so that they can spread that tax liability out. But you've got to be aware of, the tricky thing about taxes is as your income goes up, all of these new things come into play, like the net investment income tax and the higher capital gains tax. And so again, it's not how much money you make, but how much you get to keep after Uncle Sam takes his share. So if you're in the top bracket right now, you could see over 40% of your money going away as a result of that sale. And so we want to figure out, well, not just how you sell it and get the most money, but how do you sell it and keep the most money, I would say is a key core component there. And then, one of the nice things about the sale of an asset like a business is that usually you'll have this chunk of money that you can access that's already been taxed. So as you are starting to use some of those funds to supplement your income, you're pulling from money that's already been taxed. So now you can find yourself in lower tax bracket in future years. But I guess it all depends on how much money we're talking about. What's been your experience? What would you say most owners in your sphere are looking at from a liquidation? Are we talking $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $30 million, $100 million?
Yeah, I think a lot. I may think a lot of it's probably 10 million or north, and it probably depends. But I think most construction companies of any size are probably going to be worth $10 million or more that they could get.
Well, one of the things you have to be mindful of is the interest rate environment, because a lot of times any of these deals, whether you're buying real estate or you're buying businesses, there's usually some kind of financing component. And the higher the interest rate, usually the less money you get as a lump sum. And right now, interest rates are really high. You're talking 7.5% to get a mortgage. So business loans usually aren't as good as mortgage loans. And that's one of the pieces you have to be aware of. And if you have a runway where you don't have to sell all at once in a high interest rate environment, same thing goes for people that have to take a pension. If they want to take a pension versus a lump sum, the lower the interest rates, the greater the lump sum amount. And so 2 years ago, people were getting 30% more than they're getting today as a lump sum on a pension if they had that option. You see that a lot with pilots. Oftentimes will have the ability to take a partial lump sum and a partial pension. So they kind of best of both worlds. But the pension's just a lot less now than it was because it's based on the interest rate environment. And the sale of a business is also probably going to be impacted by the current rate environment.
Yeah, I would say so. And another thing, you brought this up earlier, but sometimes the tax laws in your state or the federal laws change. And so something gets unwound or something else gets introduced. And if you're in the middle of something where, your deal is straddling multiple tax years, and like you mentioned, your state of Washington, now there's some state income tax at a certain level over $2 million. And now that's going to hit you if you got money you're taking down the road.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces there, a lot of things to consider. And that's why having good advisors in your corner, because for most people, they're not out selling, they're not out experiencing this every day. They were good at building a business. They've never sold a business before for a lot of people. So if you can have people that have walked that path hundreds of times with other people that can give you guidance, that makes a ton of sense. We're going through this right now. We've got a project. We're building a art studio for my wife, and I don't know anything about building. This is all brand new to me, but the guy that's doing the work for us, he's somebody that's done a lot of these things. So when I call him up, he looks at me like I'm a kindergartner when I ask him questions, because my questions are so stupid, but for me, I don't know anything about it because I've never done it before. And I'm okay saying that I'm ignorant in this area. It's not where I spend my time. I don't spend my energy there. And that's why I hire people that I can trust that can, guide me through that process.
Yeah, that's it's also a great point. Being humble to take advice from experts, whether it's a builder and you're not one, or again, as a builder or a construction company business owner, we need to hire tax professionals, legal counsel, people that are living and breathing this type of transaction and these types of considerations every day, so that we can get the best advice.
Yeah. So this checklist I'm going to send you has succession and continuation issues, valuation and appraisal issues, sale and disposition issues, tax issues, and then some other issues to consider. And so this will be at least a starting point for people if they're thinking about selling the business. And of course, I would point them to our calculator, the retirement budget calculator that we've been developing, because like I say, now they're going to, it doesn't really matter how much money you have. Everybody seems to inflate their lifestyle to whatever income or whatever assets they have. So just knowing that you're going to be okay and that you're going to be able to make it through the rest of your life and not run out of money in retirement, that's an important thing.
Yeah, and I think it's good for all of us to remember, none of us are like a prestidigitator that could just wave a magic wand, which, a magician that could just make all this stuff go smooth.
Yeah.
And have it all figured out with one wave. There's a process and there's a lot of details and reports. So you need to have the right people on your team to help make sure that they're guiding you correctly, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be stressful because, the people that are going to be buying the business from you may not have the same values, may not have the same work ethic. And you're putting a lot of trust and you're putting your reputation in their hands. And it's going to be a stressful time. I can just about guarantee selling a business, something that you built from the ground up, that you poured your blood, sweat, and tears into, and now you're going to walk away from all of that. It's not going to be easy. But if you don't, the reality is either you're going to make the plans and the preparations and you're going to do it at a time, or something's going to happen. You're going to have a stroke, a heart attack, you're going to get cancer, and then the people you care about are going to be thrust into crisis management mode, trying to figure out how to make this transition. So it's going to transition one way or the other. That's why I like that word stewardship. Stewardship means that we don't own anything. We're just an overseer. We're a manager of it for a period of time. And that everybody has to come to terms with the fact that time period doesn't last forever. Even some of the folks we serve, they enjoy investing in rental real estate property. And they will do that a lot of times until they get to about age 80 years old. And then even if they have a property management company running those real estate properties for them, they just don't want to deal with the complexity of it anymore. Just life starts to get more simple. So even in areas like that, we see people where they get to a point in life where what we think is fun in the accumulation years, all of a sudden gets to be if you own it, you've got to take care of it. I had some people on my podcast recently. They've got a YouTube channel. They're called the Retirement Travelers. And their story is so inspiring because they left work in their mid-50s and they sold everything. I mean, even their golf clubs, everything went away. They sold their house, their boat, they had a second house, they sold it. And now they're living this lifestyle where they have everything they own in their backpack, husband and wife. They've got 5 kids in the States, but they're in Europe full-time, going from place to place to place. And what they said to me that was so striking was they said, Jason, we feel this incredible sense of freedom by getting rid of all of this stuff. They said they didn't realize how much responsibility came. Like every time, they only used their boat once a year, but every time a windstorm came in or a big storm, they'd have to go tie down the boat or pull the boat out of the water. So they just absolutely loving it. And they're really fun. If your listeners get a chance, do a search for the Retirement Travelers on YouTube. You'll see John and Bev on there, and they are living life fully.
That's awesome. Well, I love the term you use, stewardship, and that we're stewards, because again, when you look at it that way, as opposed to, taking ownership and having this possession, that also equals responsibility and even a burden, to your point, that maybe isn't really what you're after, right?
Yeah, there's, they say you never see a U-Haul following a hearse. You can't, you can't take it with you. But I do know this one lady, her husband made her promise that she would bury him with all of his money. And so at the funeral, her friend saw her reach down and slide something under the pillow. And she said, "What did you just do?" And she said, "I wrote a check for Oliver."
Perfect. Hopefully it never cashes.
Yeah. Well, man, if that check gets cashed, something weird's going on.
That's pretty funny. Well, I love it. Well, this has been another fun conversation. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and we'll have to do this again down the road. Maybe check back in and see, based on questions or feedback we get, what other things that the companies and our listeners would like to hear from you.
I would love that. I'd love to hear what your listeners took away from our time. And like I say, I'll send you this checklist for your listeners, and I'll also send you that ebook that I did on the 7 questions to work through with a group of friends to really design the next phase of life. Or even it doesn't have to be a whole phase of life. It could just be designing the next year, design it 1 year at a time.
Yeah, I love that. So one other thing we did this last time. We played a little word game. I picked a word and you picked a word. And the word I gave you was perplexed. And you used that right in the very beginning of the podcast.
I didn't want to let it slip like I did last time. No, I tried to get in there as fast as I could.
Awesome. Well, what word did you give me and how did I do it using it?
You did a great job at the very end. I was worried about you, but the word I gave you was prestidigitator, which means magician. And you were able to, at the very end, talk about waving a magic wand.
Yeah, I've never heard of that word, so it was news to me, and I'm sure most of our listeners as well.
Yeah, you sounded brilliant using it, so good job.
Oh boy, well thank you. So a couple other quick questions, just some fun stuff before we wrap up. All right, so these are just rapid fire. What's the most important thing to you in your life?
Well, for me, it's my faith. It's my relationship with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so that's what's made all of the difference. And I can say that because I don't know if I told you this on our last show, but I was an atheist before I came to know.
I did mention that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I know what it's like to live on both sides of the coin. I know what it's like to view the world. I tell people that, and I can be compassionate towards people that don't believe in anything because that was me, but I can, it's almost like putting on a pair of sunglasses. And when I was a kid in high school, they had these different biker glasses that had like purple lenses or red lenses or yellow lenses. And whatever glasses you put on was what you saw the world, that, everything looked that color. And I can just tell you that it's really hard to go from being a skeptic and a pessimist to being a believer and somebody that's more of an optimist, but it's so worth it. And I would encourage people, if they can take off those goggles of skepticism and just put on these goggles of faith and try to see the world through a different perspective, it really does change everything. It changes the relationships with the people you have. It changes the way that you look at challenges and obstacles. It changes the way that you experience joy in the world. I met this woman once, and the other thing is when you become a believer, you meet all these other people and you get to hear their stories and their testimonies. This woman, her story, she retired, and a week after retirement, she got hit as she was walking down the street. She got hit by a vehicle, a truck from behind. It severed her spine from her hips, and she spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair. She died recently. But when she came into my office, she got out of the hospital, and when she came into my office, she was telling me how she was sharing with all of the people in the hospital that were on their deathbeds. She was telling them about Jesus. And so here's somebody that could experience joy in the midst of the worst of human suffering because there's something bigger than suffering. And I was so inspired by that. And so that's definitely the most important thing to me.
That's beautiful. I love that. So, so opposite to that, what's your biggest regret in life so far?
Oh man, I've got so many regrets. I was the prodigal son. I mean, I made all of those mistakes that you could make as a young man. So they're embarrassing to think of the mistakes that I've made, but at the same time, I think to myself, I wouldn't be the person that I am today if I hadn't made the mistakes. And so I wouldn't do anything different. And so, my biggest regret, That one is hard for me because I see these things as building blocks. And so And I tend to focus on the good instead of the bad. But yeah, I mean, just think of any mistake a young person could make, and I bet you I've made it.
All right. Well, good. Well, good to get them out of the way, Jan, and
Oh, I'm still making mistakes. I'm hopefully they're not as significant as they were. I'd like to think I'm getting a little bit better every day, but I'm not. I haven't arrived yet, for sure.
Cool. Fair enough. Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate that response. So, what about how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I definitely want to be remembered as somebody who made a contribution, that invested in other people. I'd like to be remembered as somebody that loved Jesus and wasn't afraid to share my faith with openly. I think there's a lot of secret service Christians today, people that, they believe, but they don't want to speak openly about it because they don't want the persecution. Jesus said in Mark chapter 10, he said, anybody who leaves brothers and sisters, moms and homes and dads, land for me will have 100 times brothers and sisters and mothers and dads and fathers and land and persecutions. So part of the promise is persecutions. But I heard somebody say recently, they said, being a Christian isn't just about pie in the sky when you die. It's about steak on the plate while you wait. So it's the abundant life. It's the abundant life now with the promise of eternity forever. And so that would be important to me. And second to that, I would like to think, I've been married for 26 years now. So my wife,
congratulations. That's awesome.
Amazing lady. Yeah. She's put up with me for all that time. I'd like to be thought that I was a good husband. I'd like for my kids to say that I was a good dad, that I loved my family, that I made them a priority, that they knew that their dad loved them. I would love for that. I would like to think that the work that we did made a difference in the world. And we are making that difference in the world. And thanks for asking the question.
That's awesome. You bet. So now I'm just reeling it back to wrap up the conversation to our audience specifically. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the construction industry today as it relates to some of these things we've been talking about?
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about your industry from just from where we're at in the economic cycle right now. Everything seems to work in booms and busts, and we're at this inflection point where all kinds of crazy things have happened. COVID meant that some people were going to work from home instead of going into the office. So I think that has the potential to impact professional office space as an investment class. You've got housing that is now under pressure after several years of a massive run-up in values. Now you've got these valuations that the average person can't really afford to buy a house anymore, at least in my community where I live, based on average income and this new 7.5% interest rate environment. So I think there's some headwinds for real estate. I'm reminded the last time we went through the financial crisis, somebody taught me about the golden rule. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, right.
So when the real estate market starts to dip down, the people that have cash that can continue things moving forward are the ones that come out the other side. Okay, it's the ones that are over leveraged that end up getting hurt. So I would be telling people to, really think about, are you over levered right now? Good times come and go in all industries. And it doesn't mean it's going to be gone forever, but it means that we could go into, a slow spot. What do you see happening in the construction industry?
Yeah, I think it's similar to you. There, some segments are doing great. They got a lot of backlog. There's, they're in the right spaces right now that it still continues to be busy. But again, it's one of those things. It is cyclical. It goes in cycles, and I think it's important that no matter where you're at in your backlog, or if you're looking for work now, because your segment has been hit differently. I think planning for the future, saving for a rainy day, and making sure that your house is in order as much as possible. This goes personally as well as professionally in our businesses. I think the same rules apply. And so I just think in line with what you do, better planning and better preparedness is essential and, advisable to everybody.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury created a ton of liquidity. They literally pumped money into people's bank accounts. And anytime you do that, you create this massive inflation that we're experiencing now. But as interest rates have gone up, all that liquidity is starting to come back out of people's bank accounts. And unemployment's starting to go up, and the Fed is trying to slow the economy without crashing the economy, without driving us into a recession. But I think it's important to recognize that a recession is a much smaller risk than inflation that stays at 7 to 10% every year. I mean, that inflation is what destroys economies. So the Fed and the Treasury, they're going to keep doing whatever it takes to get that inflation under control. And so we need to be prepared for that.
Great advice. That's a great thing to end on. So any final thoughts or parting words or advice for the listeners today?
Mike, I just appreciate the work that you're doing, that you have this heart to want to help people, and that you want to, give people the opportunity to share their stories. And yeah, I think it's awesome. That's one of the things I love about the world we live in today is if you want to listen to a sermon, you can listen to the best preachers in the entire world. Everything's available to you for free through podcasts. If you want to talk to somebody that's an expert in your industry, I mean, you can just line them up and talk to them. And it's exciting that we live in the times that we do. It's one of my favorite quotes is, despite our greatest efforts, things will continue to get better. And I absolutely believe that the future is going to be brighter than the present.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to end. I appreciate your time. And again, always fun to connect up and to catch up and hear your advice for the rest of us. So thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right. We'll catch up with you again down the road. Appreciate you, brothers.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today, or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.